Just always wondering, because of all that, maybe that kind of kept him advancing career-wise in the military, going a higher rank. I think he was labeled at that point, too.
Well, I think he got another promotion to lieutenant colonel, but if you look at Colonel Blanchard, who was the commander of Roswell Army Airfield when that came in, and he authorized Walter Howe to go ahead and write that headlines for the Roswell Daily Record, he went on to become a multiple-star general. He made the biggest gaffe in the world, but he went along with the corporate story the next day that, it's a weather balloon, we need to cover us up, we can't do our job. So nobody who made those big mistakes really suffered at the hands of the military organization at that point. They all came out, smelling like roses. So they went along with the storyline. They did what they were told. And it's a double-edged sword. I'm kind of saddened that the story got muffled for 30 years. But I'm also proud of the guys who had a security oath and stuck with it. And that speaks a lot for their integrity. They just said, hey, I told people, I swore to you that I would keep secrets, and they did. And for me, that says a lot of their integrity.
Oh, it does, too. But, sometimes how the government comes out, the military, they kind of make you sign these documents. They tell you what will happen if you divulge anything. And, I think sometimes, they're not going to say anything, but they're also scared to say anything. But, a lot of the people, that have been interviewed in Roswell after that sure kind of had some nice, scary stories about, the military government agents coming to their house and kind of like a lot of threats were made.
That's what I understand. But, it was the Roswell story. I think everybody who's into ufology cuts their teeth on it because it's robust. There's a lot of information to cut through. But for me, Al had told me that first day, that first week, hey, we've got aliens on the base. And then I talked to people. I talked to Doug in accounting. I talked to somebody else. And as I got to know these people during my first 90 days there, all of them were saying, oh, yeah, there's this Project Blue Book. It's been on base. It's not active anymore. So I think Blue Book would have been closed about 4 years by the time I got in base. But everyone I asked, for the most part, was very aware of Wright-Patterson's connection and the Blue Book investigation or public relations story, whatever you want to call it. And that's what kind of whetted my appetite and eventually grew into me going on a quest to determine the truth behind everything that I'd heard through all those decades and all the snooping I've done and the people I've talked to. And then eventually that resulted in the first two books of my 50 Shades of Grey trilogy.
Oh, wow. I mean, what was all involved in your investigation? I mean, what all did you have to do? To get the people, to talk and open up.
Well, I started out by saying, I'm going to look at some famous cases. And I'm going to try to poke holes in those cases. And the way I did that is I read everything I could about each one of them. And then I tried to contact, depending on how old the case was, the current key witnesses. I visited the sites. For example, I visited Exeter, New Hampshire, where in 1965, young Norman Muscarello and two police officers saw a 90-foot UFO hover less than 100 feet over their head in Exeter, New Hampshire. And there was a famous book written about it. So I went to Exeter, and I went to the exact site of the sighting, and I started to find people who were around then and who were witnesses to the event, but were not included in the initial book, Incident at Exeter. And in fact, I found the son of the man who owned the farmhouse, made famous in the book by John Fuller, because that was the farmhouse over which Norman and the two police officers saw the UFO. And so the son took me around the site because he was living in his dad's home. I spent the day with Travis Walton. He's one of the most famous abductees, contactees ever. So I got a first person with Travis. I talked extensively with 3 of the principals of the Rendlesham Forest incident. So
wow.
I tried to poke holes in these stories, and I didn't care which way the stories went. Aliens, yes. Aliens, no. Did not care. I just wanted to find out the truth for myself. So that was my approach, is immersing myself into famous cases, revisiting them, and where I could, find new witnesses and review the old evidence.
How did you feel like when you talked to Travis and some of these other people? Did you feel that they were truly abducted? And did they also share to you how they felt during the abduction, whatever they can remember? Did they get the feeling that whatever abducted them was friendly towards man? Or I don't know. See, I have a mixed feeling because, like I told you before we went on the air, I get a group of people that think that aliens are here to save mankind. I don't buy that, because if they were here to save mankind, Hitler wouldn't have exterminated the Jews. We wouldn't have had World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. We wouldn't be killing each other if they wanted to step in and they're here to help mankind. I get the other feeling, like talking to some of the guests I've had on, like Calvin Parker, who claims he was abducted, that after his abduction, when I had him on my show, I said, what did you feel? Did you feel they were here to serve man? They were really friendly, caring about humans? Or did you feel they're evil? And he came and he said the magic word, evil.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will answer all 3 or 4 of those questions that you just asked. And let's make sure that when Victoria comes on, we revisit that, okay?
I will try, yes.
Okay, so what happened is I was at a conference, and I had done research on the Travis Walton site. And what I was going to do after the conference ended, because it was in the Phoenix area, I was going to go up to the Apache Siskiyou National Forest, and I knew I could get within 100 yards of where Travis's event had happened, simply because I had done enough research and I had enough clues, and I knew where I was going. But fate intervened, because at that conference I met Jennifer Stein. Now, Jennifer had just wrapped a movie called Travis, of all things. And through a newly found friend of mine who knew Jennifer, she introduced me. And Jennifer and I were talking and just chewing the fat. And I had told her my interest in the Travis Walton event and what I was going to do, that when the conference was over, in fact, the conference was in Fountain Hills, Arizona. And so I said, I'm going to leave here, and early next week I'm going to go up there and I'm going to find the site. Thank you very much. And she said, hey, you're a photographer, and I need someone to shoot some photographs of that site. And I think I can find somebody to show you exactly where I need you to go. And it's the site of the Travis Walton event. And I said, oh, Jen, this is like unbelievable. Next thing I know, she goes, hey, Travis, get over here.
Oh, wow.
And Travis Walton was standing a little bit away. He comes over and goes, yeah, Jen, what do you want? She says, look it, Travis, this is Ray. Ray, this is Travis. Ray's going to go up and shoot some photographs of those tree stumps, and we're going to include some of that, if they're good photos, in the next cut of the movie. So you and Ray are going to get together next week, and you're going to take him up there. Can you imagine? I'm like a tourist, okay, Gary? I am. Nobody knows me. No books are out. I'm literally a tourist. And I get to meet Jen. Jen introduces me to Travis. The next week, sure enough, I'm up in Heber, Arizona. I call Travis. I go, hey, you coming up today? He goes, yeah, I'll be up there in a couple of hours. And so late in the afternoon, I'm going to guess maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he shows up, and we spend about, say, 4 hours, because the sun's starting to go down. We spend about 4 hours up there. Well, Gary, I'm standing. The sun's going down. The photo shoot is over. And, in fact, you can find the story of the day that I was with Travis. You can find that in my first book. But the sun's starting to go down, and he starts talking. And he goes, you see that road over there? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, it's hard to see. He said, but we were coming up that road, and we get to this point. And he points to another place. down the hill. He said, we get to this point and we see this bright light. Now, he's talking about is himself and the 6 guys in that logging truck. So I'm spellbound, and he said, well, we look up here about where we're standing and we see this light, and we think that the forest is on fire, or maybe, there's a hunter up here, so we got to check it out. He said, we get up here. He said, we park the truck, and he points to the site. He goes, and I get out, and I walk up, and he goes, I go over there, and now he's telling me, this is Travis Walton telling me his story as I'm standing there at the site.
Well, can you share what he was telling you?
Yeah, and I am. That's what I'm saying. He's telling me where they drove. He's showing me the road. He says where they stopped, how he got out, how he was hiding behind this pile of wood. He called it slash or something like that. And then he said, I got closer. I got virtually underneath it. And then I got up to get away, and this bolt came out. He goes, it hit me in the chest. It lifted me up, and it knocked me out. And he said, well, then those guys left, and they came back to find me, and I was gone. And, there are places you can visit, like the Anne Frank House, for example, or you go to Normandy, or one of these places of deep human significance, and it becomes a religious experience, especially if you've read about it and you realize what has happened on those sites. And for me, this was one of those moments where I have the most famous, in my book, contactee, a guy who spent 5 days on a spaceship, telling me in real time, pointing everything out, what happened. So, to answer your questions, Travis said that he originally believed that it was a weaponization, that he was a victim of a weapon. And he quickly, through the years, have come to change that totally. He realizes that it was an accident, like static electricity, when you would run across the carpet and then you touch your brother, on his ear, and that spark would jolt him.
Yeah, he got zapped.
Yeah, so he this thing was spinning up. Whatever its energy source was spinning up, and he was the closest thing between the ship and ground. So I'm a double E, and I understand these things. It hit him. It discharged him, blew him back. Well, they took him on the ship. He thought originally, while he was there, that he was a captive. He was abducted. He was never going to come home. He was, going to be a laboratory rat. But he realized that they kept him through the years. He realized that they kept him on board to heal him. He essentially was dead, or barely clinging to life. And their medicine brought him back. And of course, they couldn't do it instantaneously. So, if you're zapped with the right amount of current, it will sizzle you. And he assumed that he was burned. But on the ride back, we stopped again because, again, in book 1, you'll see photographs of myself and Travis, and I've got a photograph of Travis, and the backdrop is a herd of wild horses.
Oh, wow.
And we stopped to see these wild horses, and we saw them we stopped on the way up and the way back. So I have all these photos in there, and there's a backdrop of these wild horses, and we can get into that more later. But on the way down, Travis is telling me, he said, they healed me. He said, my things that could be tested, his heart rate, cholesterol, that stuff, was ideal. They literally not only healed him, but he claims they enhanced his health through that 5-day process.
I will say this. There was a major movie that came out about what happened to Travis. And one of my dad's friends was one of the main actors in the movie, James Gardner. And I remember James talking to my dad, because he would come up and visit my dad every summer up here in Washington State. And he was telling us about, that movie. That before that, he was not a believer in UFOs and aliens. And he said, even reading the script and going over everything, even the changes they made to make it, a movie,